Welcome to the Tenant Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson here in Denver, Colorado, and I'm joined in person for the first time in a couple months by my partner and friend, Wes Brown.
It's beautiful to be here. It's a great day in Denver. The weather's wonderful, and it's wonderful to be here. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. Nice to do this in person for a change. We have a great episode for you this week. Our guest this week is Adrianna Abarca. She is the founder and chair of the Latino Cultural Arts Center here in Denver, Colorado. Adrianna has curated an exhibit at History Colorado called Hecho and Colorado, an exhibition of some 60 works that highlight the artistic and intellectual contributions of Native, Mexican, and Chicano artists to the state of Colorado. The exhibit is on display at History Colorado through January 10th, 2021. Adrianna, it's good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You know what? I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this and doing it in person too in these weird times with the whole pandemic thing and everything. So thank you.
Thank you so much for showing us around in the collection that you've started.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, it was very educational. We got a personal tour this morning, and we got to see some of Adrianna's family's personal art collection, which is absolutely phenomenal and mind-blowing. Your family has a rich history here in Denver in the art community, and I want to talk about that history before we get into some of the things that you're currently doing. Can you talk about your father and mother and all the things that they did to help contribute to the arts community here in Denver and to artists in general?
I'll give you a little bit of a background about my parents. Unfortunately, they're no longer with us, but my father was an immigrant from Tulancingo, the state of Hidalgo in central Mexico. He came to the States in 1955. His first stop was Chicago to work in the steel mills. And then my mother was born in California, but raised here in North Denver at the Queen of Heaven Orphanage. And her parents were primarily Irish. And our parents met here in Denver in approximately 1960. My father was on his way to California in search of opportunity. He didn't want to stay working in the steel mills after he had to do a year of military service. His car broke down here in Denver. He met my mother, who rarely went out, but it was, I believe, meant to be, love at first sight. And soon after, they were married and started the family and raised us here in North Denver, really Northwest Denver. So my parents were very entrepreneurial. Although they didn't go beyond having a high school education, either one of them, they were very self-motivated, read a lot, and would often take classes at Emily Griffith. So my father had numerous jobs, but it became harder and harder to be able to provide for the family with the type of work he was doing. So at some point, he decided it was necessary to start his own business. So he began two simultaneous businesses. One was La Fonda Restaurant, along with his brother Ramon and their partner Enrique Garcia. And that's in Wheat Ridge, and it still exists today. I believe they've already celebrated their 50th anniversary. And although it's not in the family any longer, it's still part of our family history. And then my parents also started Ready Foods. And the beginning of Ready Foods was really a tortilla plant that we called El Sol. And we made tortillas. My father had the idea that we could make tortillas for Lucerne or Safeway brand. And that's how we started the tortilla plant. And then from there, we started making other food products, primarily Mexican food, for restaurants here in Denver. So I like to say that, and this is like a winded answer to your question, but in the late 70s, as Ready Foods began to be more successful, and I always say when my dad had a few extra bucks in his pocket, he would go hang out with artists, local artists who mostly self-identified as Chicano here in Denver. And he had met them via an artist named Tim Cisneros, who was a dear friend of my father's. And so he would oftentimes go to the artists' studios, invite them out for a menudo or a taco, and just hang out and enjoy their company and conversation. And I believe his appreciation for art came from him living in Mexico City as a young man and being exposed to the Mexican master muralists and to the incredible museums in Mexico City and all the incredible culture of Mexico, and bringing that love of Mexican history and art and culture with him to the United States. And so he shared that with the artists in their conversations, and he really encouraged them and inspired them and brought a business perspective to them that they maybe wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to. So that's really how the collection started in the late 70s, our parents acquiring pieces. Originally, they would be hung in the Ready Foods offices, but with time, the offices were already well stocked, so to speak. And a lot of the paintings ended up in our home. So I was fortunate to have that art always around me.
That must have been phenomenal growing up with art, being surrounded by all that art, not only at the family offices where Ready Foods was, but also at your home. And obviously it sounds like you got your love of reading from your parents as well, and education.
I cannot claim to be nearly the reader that my parents were, or even my older brother, but I was very much influenced by finding books in the home that we couldn't find in the local library or in school. So again, I felt incredibly blessed to be surrounded by that and to be able to go to artists' exhibits and go to their studios, because the kids that I grew up with never had that exposure, never had that opportunity. And looking back, I feel our community was very much deprived of that opportunity and exposure to our history and culture. And I believe it was very hard for us. Even with me, with my exposure to art and culture, it was still hard to form a cultural identity. So I can't imagine how my peers could do so when they had no access to materials or very limited exposure to their culture. And I can talk further on that. I went to Brown Elementary, Lake Junior High, and North High School. So I'm 56 now. So I just remember in elementary school, and our mom would always take us to Woodbury Library, but we could never find any books that made us feel like we belonged or that were relatable. It was always like Dick and Jane, and literally the only book I found in my youth or in my childhood was a book about a Peruvian boy growing up in the mountains of the Andes and his love of a tapir animal, a tapir. And I cling to that book and I cherish that book, but of course I had to give it back. And in Brown, the only thing they taught us about being Mexican literally was an Anglo teacher trying to teach us how to dance the Mexican hat dance. And the third thing that I really strongly remember is that the only art we were exposed to in elementary school was a painting hanging in the library called The Blue Boy. And I believe it was a Dutch boy, maybe from the, 1700s. But never seeing any representation of ourselves, although probably 90% of the kids that I went to school with were Mexican American. We just couldn't find any representation in our school books. In our teachers, there were no Hispano, Mexicano, Latino teachers. Just a total void, practically. So thank God, for some reason, we were aware of the Chicano civil rights movement. We didn't really understand it, but at least we knew things, the tide was changing, things were different. And although we hadn't made progress in the Chicano civil rights movement, at least we were beginning to have our first moments of defiance in elementary school, going around the halls, saying to each other, Chicano power, and raising our fists. It was invaluable that I grew up in the age of the Chicano civil rights movement.
So it's kind of interesting because I grew up in South Dakota, and I actually grew up on an open reservation, Indian reservation, in a town called Sisseton. And as elementary, we had a little bit of Dakota history, but to hear that you had like no history of your culture is really kind of interesting because we're peers as far as age. I'm 58. Mm-hmm. And so kind of a little bit different experience. And I would say it was, in my case, it was very limited, but we did have some cultural education when it came to the Native American community. I would imagine it was during the Chicano movement that things maybe started to change in Colorado. When did it start changing for education?
From what I recall, the only exposure that I had in junior high and what I consider a very pivotal point in my life, I remember going to this Adelante Mujer conference and hearing very eloquent women, Chicanas, not that much older than me, encouraging me and our group, me and my peers, to understand the need to rise and then give back to the community. A sense of community identity and thinking beyond just ourselves. And I was very much inspired by that. For the first time, seeing Chicanas as role models, as inspiration. And by that time, my peers and I had already lost our ability to communicate in Spanish, although most of our parents were at some level or another Spanish speakers. Of course, my father was fluent, but because my mother wasn't fluent, we didn't use Spanish in the home, but mainly our parents assumed that we would learn Spanish in school. So it wasn't so necessary to provide it in the home. Sadly, educators, maybe I had a few Latino educators in middle school, they just weren't of the highest standard that they could inspire us or challenge us the way that we needed to be. So I don't think that it was probably by the time I was in high school, I'm sure that the Chicano civil rights movement was making big inroads, but primarily probably on the college level by creating the Chicano studies departments in the universities. I would say the most pivotal experience I had in high school was having the vice principal, Dr. Marta Urioste, who was well known here in Denver and still is well known in her work in education. I had her take an interest in me for whatever reason, and she really pushed me. And she pushed me into college, really. I say it was many factors that got me into college, and one of them was Marta Urioste insisting that I needed to go to college, or I would never have considered that an option for myself.
Yeah, it's amazing how maybe one teacher can like really push you or into a certain direction that maybe you wouldn't have gone. So it's kind of cool that at least there was somebody in your life that was kind of pushing you in that direction, or as far as educators. And
my older brother had gone on to college, but again, maybe because I was female, it wasn't as expected of me. And my parents were very supportive. If you want to do it, great. But they were at the other end saying, well, if you don't want to, no problem. Yeah. They weren't like, you have to go to college or we expect you to go to college. It was never an expectation for me. And again, even less so for my peers. It was even less of an expectation for them. And they didn't necessarily have a relative who was going on to college that could encourage them. And there were just so many factors that we needed at that time to get us into college. And I remember very specifically the college counselor not helping us at all, me and my Chicano or Mexican-American peers. He very directly would say, here's an application to Metro. But he never helped us or never encouraged us to consider our other options, even if we were amongst the more achieving students, the kids that were taking AP classes or getting the best grades. We still weren't encouraged to look at different college options.
Mm-hmm. So you were a little more fortunate than other kids where you grew up in North Denver, and that at least your parents were well-read and you were exposed to art from your culture where other kids didn't get that opportunity. What did they think when they came over to your house and they see like all this art on your walls and stuff?
I wish I could say that my friends were exposed, but we probably mainly just saw each other outside the home. We were probably running around, riding our bikes or playing soccer, or didn't spend a lot of time in the home.
Okay.
And weren't really guided by our parents. We were pretty independent kids back then. And I probably even didn't appreciate enough of what I had to share that with my friends until I was older. It was part of my process of with time, realizing how good I had it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, a lot of times those kind of cultural things, or not even cultural things, even in my case, like my grandparents or whatever, you don't really appreciate it until you become an age where you look back and it's like, oh my gosh, that was really cool that I had this experience. But in the moment, you're just being a kid, living life and enjoying things. So I think that's typically pretty normal. And
in addition to just living life and enjoying ourselves, I believe our community was really struggling to figure out an identity. That's part of what happened with the Chicano Civil Rights Movement, is how to form a new identity, hence the terminology Chicano, and how to reintegrate our native cultures. And especially, it was difficult because we didn't have access to those materials. There weren't books written about the cultures, the native cultures of the Southwest, or if they existed, we sure as heck didn't have access to them or nowhere to find them. And of course, we didn't have internet back then. And again, in addition to having lost Spanish, a lot of the kids, although they didn't self-identify as Spanish, their parents were calling themselves Spanish and telling the kids, hey, you're Spanish. So there was that conflict. Well, why are they saying we're Spanish, but we don't look Spanish and we don't feel Spanish? We don't relate to Spanish. What does that mean? I mean, Spain's way the heck over there. And it was like we kind of were very much in a no man's land, and always thinking, well, we're not Mexican because we don't relate to that. And that's not our experience. And we don't speak Spanish, but we're not American because we're not white. And we don't get what they're trying to teach us about all this history that took place on the East Coast. And it was just so unrelatable and unrecognizable to our own experience. And honestly, my age group probably felt more connected to the African American community than to any other community, because they were pretty much in the same boat we were. And at least they spoke English too. So, I mean, we had music in common, maybe sports in common, being outsiders together. It was just very unusual to me, because we didn't have a lot of African Americans in our community, but the few that we did, we felt really comfortable with them and had a kinship with them that we didn't have to any other group at that time.
Yeah.
You know, we have, I want to address this real quick. We have listeners that listen to us all over the world in different countries. And for those people that live maybe halfway across the world, can you explain, because we've talked to Chicano artists, but we've never talked about what a Chicano is. Can you put that in words?
I can do my best. I'm pretty familiar with the terminology, and having lived through it, everyone has a unique interpretation, but pretty much there's a consensus that terminology probably came from the word Mexicano, Chicano, Mexicano, Chicano. So it's related to the Aztec or Nahuatl language. And it came very specifically out of that time period, the late 60s, early 70s. And it was a way to reconnect to our native heritage and de-emphasize the Spanish rather than overemphasize it as it had traditionally been. And most people who came to self-identify as Chicano were part of the civil rights movement or went on to receive an education, a higher education, and take Chicano studies courses. You would take it on as a way to identify yourself, but it's a terminology that you take on for yourself. It's not something that people can place on you. It's an identity that you choose to relate to, and very much connected to the cultural arts and the history, and having a knowledge and an appreciation of our history and culture. And so in order for you to give yourself that title, you really had to go through a certain initiation, which was becoming educated and becoming self-aware and spending time with people who were in your same boat, also intending to learn more about their history and culture. It was kind of a challenge it was a challenge to yourself, but it was also a defiance and a way to say to the dominating culture, you can't necessarily control me. And when I band with similar-minded people, you can't control us. We can determine our own path and future, and it's a self-determination. But I have to say that terminology now is rarely used by the younger generation because they weren't so much a product of the Chicano civil rights movement as those of us who do self-identify as Chicana or Chicano. But also, a lot of them just don't have the opportunity to go on to college. And if they do, if they're the younger generation and they go on to take Chicano studies, there's a higher likelihood that they'll self-identify as Chicana or Chicano if they're Mexican American. But nowadays also we have an influx of new immigrants from different parts of Latin America. So, for example, the father of my daughter was from Honduras. So my daughter would never self-identify as Chicana because she's not just Mexican American, she's also Honduran. So that changes the mix and it changes the way that people self-identify. So again, with time, I don't believe there will be very many people, younger people who will self-identify as Chicano. But for sure in my generation and the generation that's before my generation, we still self-identify as Chicanos.
It's an evolution, right? And it's a sense of pride.
Yes,
too.
very much.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the moment and kind of explaining that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
You have this overview of different subsets or different ways that people identify themselves. Mm-hmm. But then it was a generational thing, and you had like very regional things about how people thought about themselves or how they fit into the community. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. So I think a lot about identity, self-identification, how people name themselves or call themselves versus what's imposed on them. And I think the reason why I put so much thought into it is because I ended up with a degree in Latin American Studies from Boulder. And so in addition to taking Chicano studies classes, where I found my role model, Cordelia Candelaria, who was a Chicana educator. She had a doctorate and she was a writer. And she really guided me and was a role model for me up in Boulder. But in addition to taking Chicano studies classes and working in Chicano studies department, I took classes in Latin American studies where I learned about Latin American history, Latin American art and culture. It really inspired me to grow my own identity. So not only was I a Chicana, I morphed into being a Chicana and a Latina and a Latina Americana. And with time, I also was able to take on the identity of self-identifying as a Mexican because I got my dual citizenship. So officially, I'm also a Mexican. But what I loved about being Latina or Latino Americana was that I could expand my connection to the world, and I could eventually recapture the Spanish language and communicate with people from so many other countries and have something in common with them via the language. But of course, I never wanted to exclude the Brazilians, although their language is Portuguese rather than Spanish. It was important to include them as part of that Latin American identity and experience. So I brought that appreciation of all of Latin America into my world and into my reality, into my practice around art, and I expanded my world tremendously, and I'm very grateful for that I didn't limit myself to what was in my own backyard. And it just also put it all into a world context and world history, and how much we're products of history and all that happened before us, and with the conquests, and with the migration or diaspora of the African people into the Americas, and all of the mixing and mixtures of people in Latin America, and all the mixing and mixtures of history and culture really fascinated me. And to be part of something bigger and greater was just very inspirational to me, to consider all of Latin America a resource, not only to me, but to my community. And I began to advocate for not just Chicanos and Mexicanos, but all of Latin Americans, whether they were here in the United States or in their home countries, or even in Europe or Canada, wherever they may be. But our histories and cultures are as valuable as those that came from Europe. And always struggling with the fact that institutions like the Denver Art Museum were always glorifying and creating exhibits that represented Western European culture, but managed to always exclude the people of the Americas. And how is that possible when the United States is part of the Americas? It was always mind-boggling to me. And for the past 10 years or more, I've been challenging that institution and many of the other institutions to become more inclusive and to look in their own backyard and to not be so exclusionary and elitist, and realize that if they want to be elitist towards European, that there were a lot of Europeans that migrated to not just the United States, but all of the Americas. So if they somehow believe that European is superior, well, then acknowledge that European, but that has then been influenced by their realities in Latin America. The fact that they ended up mixing with the African people and the people who had roots in Africa, and the native people had their roots for centuries here in the Americas.
That's just the American story, though, isn't it? That we're so influenced by the Anglo-Saxon history that we've totally, through the, and I think it's changing because of people like you, that we're starting to open our, vision of what our history is, and including Latin American and African descent. And we're definitely moving in the right direction, but there's a long ways to go. I think it's so important that we broaden our vision of what a more global look at things.
And as far as how people self-identify, I always encourage people to ask the person that they're meeting for the first time, how do you self-identify? What do you call yourself? And don't assume that they call themselves Hispanic, or don't assume they call themselves Latinos or Chicanos or Mexicanos or whatever. Let them tell you how they self-identify. And from the end of someone who is saying how they self-identify, it's important to be able to back that up. I call myself this because, or I call myself all of the above because, and you need to have enough education to be able to back up. In my opinion, my preference is that if you call yourself something, you know why you call yourself that. It's because your parents told you to. It's because you're your teachers told you to, it's because your peers told you to, or you came to it on your own. So I always encourage people to approach others with the question, how do you self-identify?
I like that.
Yeah.
So you did Latin American studies in school and when you went to college. How did you pivot into going from getting your education and doing the work that you currently do now in the arts and your different organizations that you're working with and on?
So I ended up in San Francisco for 5 years. And I'm very grateful to that experience because I was able to work for an art gallery, an artist management agency, and eventually for the Mexican Museum. I was there when what I call the heyday of the Chicano, Latino Americano art scene in primarily the Mission District. And the Mexican Museum was very active at the time. And maybe a year or two after I left there, unfortunately, they had to close their doors. And I believe they're only now going to reopen to the community. So I was very much a product of that experience. I got to meet a lot of those artists and performers, and very much made me realize that Denver was a sleepy little town in comparison, that our community hadn't fully developed its cultural art scene the way that it needed to be developed and grown to serve our population. So really when I came back to Denver after 5 years, I brought that experience from California with me and the desire to just, again, expand what we were doing here and become a little more sophisticated, so to speak, a little more, less a sleepy town and become a more vibrant town. And again, with the need to serve a growing community, a growing population.
How do you feel about how the Denver art scene has evolved in the last 10 years? Because it's really taken off. And I imagine it's because of the growth. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? Because we've kind of evolved as a city and because it became a little bit more cosmopolitan and open and more forward-thinking. But at the same time, we have this issue of all these people moving in and gentrification and kind of I don't want to say decimation, but
pretty darn close.
Yeah, I guess so, right? Of different communities here in Denver.
Mm-hmm. So I can't talk to the art scene, the bigger art scene, because I've kind of settled into my niche right now just because I have limited resources, limited time. And I'm very focused on the Chicano, Mexicano, Latino Americano art scene, less focused on what's going on in the big picture, less focused on what's going on with crush walls and the graffiti or the public art scene. But I know that there's a great division there, and a lot of resources are put into the quote unquote Anglo art scene that never make it into our art scene. When you think of Rhino is very much, for lack of better terminology, a white art scene. And we're not partaking in that for the most part until recently. You have a couple of the Mexican-American artists participating in crush walls, for example. But with all the art galleries and this and that, considering our numbers here, our population, who knows what it is, 30% maybe here in Denver of Chicano, Mexicano, Latino population. Considering the numbers, very few of us are going into higher ed to study art, to work on our skills or develop our skills. Very few of us are shown in the art galleries. Very few of us are represented on the murals around town. Very few of us benefit from the gentrification and as I almost said in Spanish, más bien, we're being very much put on the back burner. And I like to discuss a lot about the fact that how gentrification has harmed our communities, in that when we moved into these neighborhoods as Chicanos or Mexicanos, we lived in the same housing that existed. We patronized the businesses that were in the neighborhood previous to our arriving in these neighborhoods. We went to school with the people that were there before us. We cohabitated, so to speak, and there wasn't a lot of conflict. There wasn't a lot of social, ethnic conflict or class conflict. It was pretty smooth. I mean, at least when I was growing up. Actually, it was harder in that time period, it was harder for the Chicanos to relate to the Mexicanos than it was for the Chicanos to relate to the Italians, for example, because the main division or divider was on lines of language, because the Chicanos who had been here for many generations could no longer communicate with the new arrival Mexicans in the 80s. The Mexicans that arrived in the 80s were primarily from northern Mexico, came from rural communities, not urban communities. And by this time, the Colorado Chicano or Mexican American was primarily urban. So we didn't have that in common. And then we just, the several generations didn't know what it was to be Mexican anymore. It was much more of a culture clash amongst our own people than it was with our neighbors who were Italian, who were primarily, the population in North Denver, or, any other groups that we ended up coming into contact with. There wasn't that much conflict or clashing as it was with our own people, sadly. But going back to what's happening today, it's more on economic more than cultural terms. The people coming in today are generally from other states, generally quote unquote white, generally don't have an appreciation for the history and culture of the people from this region. Maybe all that they know about us or care for about us is our Mexican beer and our food. Have torn down our houses, have torn down our businesses, have replaced them with their own housing, their own businesses. That disrespect has taken a psychic toll on our community. The displacement, this is the second largest displacement since the displacement of the Chicano-Mexicano community from the Auraria neighborhood in central Denver. The need for our people now to find homes in the suburbs, which I always say we can't duplicate the experience we had in the inner city with what's out in the suburbs, because historically the families lived nearby to each other. And you could go spend the weekends with your grandma or your tias and tios or your primos, or you would see them at school, or you'd run into them at the taqueria or the panaderia, or you would keep the community alive and healthy via the experiences of the if you're not going to church, you're at least going to the church fairs and seeing each other there. And you can't duplicate that in the suburbs, because of the fact that the houses are further apart, that kids don't walk to school and go to the same schools anymore, that there aren't the mom and pop shops and the community-owned restaurants. And so I think that our community is going to take an even bigger hit now than the first wave of gentrification, which pulled our neighborhood apart in Auraria. I think now the communities of North and West Denver are going to be even further harmed, and it's going to be very, very difficult to bring our children up with a strong sense of community and cultural identity, just for the fact of distance. And you go into the suburbs and everything's corporate. All the restaurants are corporate. All the businesses are corporate. It's very, very, and someone told me the other day, well, it's just different in the suburbs. And of course it's very different, but I don't think it's going to people are going to be able to duplicate what we had in the inner city, the closeness that we had with our community and with our families. And everything's getting so spread out, and it takes a toll on our young people. And I can't take my daughter and show her, well, that's where your father painted a mural in that Italian restaurant here in North Denver. And, this is where my best friend was. And, this is where she lived at just, down the street from me. And one of the houses that I grew up with was torn down. I can't show her, well, that's the house I grew up in. And, all of that is just, it's being decimated. The term that you brought up, it is literally being decimated. And so what I struggle with is how to secure our history, our place in the inner city and in this state in general, reminding people, hey, we've been here for a long, long time, and you need to acknowledge that, or you should acknowledge it, and we would hope you would acknowledge it. And also remember, we're not going anywhere. I mean, even though we've been weakened, we'll figure this out and we'll somehow hold on to our cultural identity. It's not going to get wiped out. No matter how much disregard you have for us, we'll figure a way to preserve it, and we're resilient and we'll come out stronger somehow.
I think it's important that family push the heritage on to their next generation, even though they may, the next generation may be accepting it, kicking and screaming and trying to assimilate into the 21st century culture of, I think it's so important to keep that family heritage connection. I just can't encourage that enough, because having a sense of identity is so important. And I think we kind of move away from it. I mean, even if you look at how church attendance has declined, and so nobody's going to churches anymore, and nobody's in those community kind of gatherings like they used to be. So, and then when you have what gentrification going on, where you're tearing down whole communities to build high rises, or, the identical cookie cutter housing, it strips away that identity even more, and it makes it even harder to self-identify from your heritage.
Mm-hmm. So, what I think that's changing, that I'm very grateful for, is that the young people are now comfortable using Spanish. And that changes the picture very much. So I'll give you an example. I curated an exhibit 2 years ago at the Emmanuel Gallery at Auraria campus. It was called Belleza Mexicana. And I integrated images of Chicanas with images of Mexicanas. And I was thrilled to see that the students that came out to see the exhibit were enjoying the artwork and talking amongst themselves, speaking Spanish, and very comfortable and very proud of what they were seeing and using their Spanish at the same time. And this was at Auraria campus, and this is the neighborhood that I would go to as a young girl with my father primarily and hang out. And to recapture the language gives the youth a way to appreciate their culture, whether it's Mexican or Colombian or whatever, because they can listen to the music of that country. And music is a great way to integrate young people into a culture. And maybe it's not the traditional music that they're first being introduced to. Maybe it's the modern music or the contemporary music, but that will bring them back to the music with time of their parents and of their grandparents and of eventually their ancestors, so to speak. But language is how we're able to come back to our culture in a way that previously we weren't able to. And the fact that these young people speak Spanish make it possible that someday, if they get an education or get a career, that they can use that ability to speak Spanish to travel and work in Latin America. So again, that opens our world to so many more possibilities, something so much bigger than just themselves. And that's a beautiful thing. And a lot of Chicanos have fought for bilingual education, for resisting English only. And that is very much one of the biggest accomplishments of the Chicano civil rights movement.
And you yourself are really trying to help facilitate the whole evolution of what a cultural center and a place where people can come together culturally and look at beautiful pieces of art. Talk about the things that you're involved with right now. Talk about the LCAC and what kind of work you're trying to facilitate with that.
Again, I believe it's my life's work and my personal mission to develop the Latino Cultural Arts Center. I believe I'm in a unique position that I have benefited from a lot of people's struggles, including my parents. And I was able to get educated, and I am able to give back to community. And the way I'm going to do that is through the cultural arts, the Latino cultural arts. I'm very anxious to share all of these amazing books that I've collected over the years, and all this amazing artwork, and all of this knowledge, and even my textile collection with the younger generation, so that they're inspired to dig deeper into their own cultural heritage and want to travel throughout the Americas and expose themselves more to what our people have to offer. The way, again, that we're going about it is to create a cultural campus. So we have 3 locations here. 2 of the locations are in the Sun Valley neighborhood, 1 in La Alma Park, but they're all approximately 8 blocks from each other. And what we're going to start with is a project we're calling Las Bodegas, or the warehouses. We have the property off of 12th Avenue and I-25, and now we need to renovate those 2 warehouses, and that's where we're going to start our community art space. And ideally, we'll include more than just visual arts, but to start with, it's looking like realistically we'll have to focus on the visual arts. And again, from all of Latin America and all the mediums, as many mediums as we can possibly offer. And open that center up to all age groups and all skill levels. And make it a place where community can come hang out and feel a sense of community and family. And it's important to make education and learning desirable. And one thing that I feel very sad about is that our young people have lost their sense of curiosity. And we want to really encourage the young people to be as curious as possible and to strive for excellence in anything that they do. And in the visual arts that we will offer them, in the back of their minds, we want them to realize that they can become excellent in those different areas and potentially even consider making one of those areas a career for themselves. And if they want to be a career artist, how can they do it successfully? How can they need to learn also the business aspects of that. And we would provide guidance to them in that area.
That's fantastic. You talked about the 3 different locations of this campus that's within 8-block radius. What will the other 2 locations, what would they have to offer?
So the property that we have on 8th Avenue in Decatur right now, it's just a pretty small building. And in the interim, we use that location for our offices and for our retail store, Hijos del Sol, which translates into Children of the Sun. And in that store, we sell goods that are made primarily by Latino artisans in the United States or Latino artisans from throughout the Americas, so that they can keep their traditional art forms alive, so that they can continue to weave and sew and carve and create these beautiful representations of their heritage. And at that site, if we can acquire 2 other properties, we'll have half a city block. And what we would like to build on 8th and Decatur will be an academy of Latino cultural arts where young people, primarily ages, let's say 16 to 21, can pursue a career in either performing arts, visual arts, culinary arts, or music and spoken word. And if they don't want to pursue a career just yet, then we will help guide them to higher education where they can really hone in on their skills and just pursue the education so that they can pursue eventually excellence in one of those areas. And in addition to the academy, above that, we would love to offer live workspace for artists and their families. So that's the big vision for that campus. And then the third campus is off of Colfax and Federal under the Colfax Bridge, just a couple blocks from the new Meow Wolf, catty corner from Brooklyn's restaurant. And this will be our gemstone or our main campus where we hope to, if we can develop the vision, we would hope to have a restaurant run by Dana Rodriguez, who has Super Mega Bien and working class restaurants off of 25th and Larmer, have her develop a restaurant concept for us on the lower level. And then we would have, of course, our library, our research library. And then we would have the Museo de Herencia Mexicana, or the Mexican Heritage Museum, which would house the Abarca family collection. In addition, we would have a floor dedicated to Latin America, which we're calling Museo Colibri, or Hummingbird, which is the hummingbird can be found throughout the Americas. And then we would like to have a black box theater to partner with Su Teatro and programming performances. And we would like to have also a rooftop event space for our events, but also to make available to the community. So it's a larger vision, a bigger vision. And I think that it's very important to think big, dream big. And I think people respect people who dream and think big. I always say I'd rather have to tone that down or shave off of the top, but I don't want to start small anymore. I don't think our community can afford to think small or act small. And this is a vision that we need to better serve a growing community.
So how are you going about facilitating or trying to facilitate each one of these campuses? Is it all self-funded, or do you have people that are donating towards the cause and to these campuses? Let's talk a little bit about that, because I'm just curious, like if you're getting much support outside of yourself from the community.
So I've been working the past few years to build a network. I've had a lot of setbacks, a lot of disillusions, a lot of people that I've brought on to the team that have unfortunately let not just me, but the project down, that didn't have the dedication and the passion that I have. And we're really just into this project for their own self-aggrandizement. And fortunately, I have mentored a young man named Alfredo Reyes, who's now 30. When he was 25, I met him, and he was working on his master's degree in education at the time. And he took on the LCAC as a project to write about for his master's thesis. He went on and was going to get a PhD in education from Santa Cruz, but became very disillusioned with the process. And when I heard about his disillusion and his considering looking for a job, a real job, so to speak, I welcomed him back into the fold of LCAC and to come back to Denver and to continue to develop the concepts that we were beginning to develop 5 years ago. And in him, I found an amazing talent, a very bright young man, very motivated to train to become the future executive director. He's willing to put in the time and energy and effort, and he has the natural intelligence and the education to back that up. And along with him and a couple of new workers that we have, Joyce Sanchez has a skill set that's invaluable, and sense of humor that really clicks with our sense of humor, and we're really excited to have her with us. We have a young lady named Victoria Gonzalez, who's also about 30 years old, and she's worked with me for the past 2 years to develop our media presence and our marketing. And now we have a very strong website and a very good presence on Instagram and Facebook. For this small little team, we're mighty, and we're making a big impact here in Denver. With the Hecho en Colorado exhibit at History Colorado, we're getting great recognition in the media. But also, I spend a lot of time giving tours to people in the community and letting them see how the art is so closely integrated with the history of our people in this region. And it's very important to make those cultural connections. We're all working to build our partnerships in community and on a national level. And we're very proud with the progress we're making nationally, bringing attention to our community here in Denver. We partner with the National Mexican Museum in Chicago. We're getting the attention of U.S. Bank Corporate and how we can help to educate their employees around the subject of Day of the Dead. And they're big supporters of our ofrenda kits this year. And we're doing educational programming via Zoom. And that partnership on a national level with other organizations like the National Hispanic Cultural Center, or eventually the Mexican Museum in San Francisco, but just other national organizations that we can partner with. Of course, we work very closely with the culturals, primarily, not exclusively, the Latino culturals here in Denver. But also what we're creating is an international network. We partner with Beto Monjardin, who has a gown in the Hecho en Colorado exhibit, and he started Latin Fashion Week Colorado last year. And he's bringing international talent from Latin America to Denver, and we're partnering and supporting his efforts. And we work with a group called GD Lab out of Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. And we support their performers, their dancers, their musicians, their visual artists. We've had a lot of them come to Denver and work with us and teach classes. And eventually we hope to send our community to work with them in Guadalajara. And again, just creating these international as well as national contacts and opening up those channels of communication. And our vision is to have Denver be a launch pad for Latino artists coming into the United States. And they start here, and then we use our contacts throughout the United States and maybe have some of these artists then go from Denver to Los Angeles or San Francisco or Chicago or New York or wherever it is that they could potentially find a support system or an audience.
So really, you're trying to make Denver kind of the epicenter of the Latino world here in the United States.
Yes.
And spreading it from there.
Yes, the Latino arts world. And I just think the possibilities are amazing. And although some people try to see or believe that Miami is that, from the perspective of someone from the Southwest, Miami doesn't feel particularly inclusive. And although geographically Miami is above Latin America, psychologically, for the fact that Denver is above Mexico, it's kind of seen as how Latin America can come up through Central America, Mexico, and into the United States through the Southwest, rather than via Miami. So it's a very much a psychological, but we're the ones who are going to be leading that effort and create that momentum and create that intercambio or exchange.
That's exciting.
Thank you. I believe so.
I want to talk a minute about your family's art collection. Your dad collected. How large of a collection did he amass? Is it pretty large? I know you said that you don't know how many pieces are in the collection, but was it pretty substantial by the time you started adding to it?
I would say it wasn't substantial, but it was enough to create a foundation that I could grow from. So more than anything, my father considered himself a friend of the artists. He enjoyed hanging out with them. He met a lot of the Mexican masters, but he never once collected their work while he had the chance to, so to speak, while he was hanging out with them or in their studios or visiting their towns. He never had the intent of collecting their work. It was all about the experience and the exchange. And it was really because of my experience at the Mexican Museum that I started to develop the mindset of being a collector, of becoming a collector myself. But my father would never have called himself a collector. And it wasn't until towards the end of his life that I said to him, we need to be more intentional about this. You've started something that's amazing, and we have the possibility now economically to grow the collection. Let's do this. So for the last few years of his life, he would drive with my cousin to Mexico and fill up the car or the SUV with things that they had acquired on their trip, primarily like folk art. Started to collect some folk art. When we would take trips to Oaxaca, I eventually got him to commit to buying a couple of large paintings by up-and-coming Oaxacan artists. But it wasn't so much that he saw himself as a collector, but he imagined that I could take the baton, so to speak, and do something with it. And so he was willing to leave the collection in my care. But it was really my mother who planted the seed of eventually creating a museum for the collection. Even back in the 70s, she had the dream of buying the original La Loma restaurant when it was in a small home in North Denver, and buying that little home and that being the museum or where the collection would be housed for the public to enjoy. So I always say it's very important to mention that I see myself as a conduit, not as this amazing collector that I want to brag about being this amazing collector and the largest collector of Chicano and Mexicano folk art and fine art in the Rocky Mountain region. It's not for me that I collect. I collect for our community, primarily our Chicano Mexicano community, but also for the broader Denver community and ultimately for anyone who expresses an interest or a desire to learn, to come to this Mexican Heritage Museum and learn more and appreciate more. And my dream is to create vignettes in the museum and incorporate multiple types of objects into the exhibition or to the display, have fine art mixed with folk art, with textile, with photography from that period of time, with personal objects of people, just to make it all very familiar, and for those who grew up with that culture, that it creates a certain sense of nostalgia for them. I think it's really important to hold on to some of that nostalgia as well. So what I collect, for the most part, I would call representational, very familiar to anybody who comes into contact with the artwork. It feels like something that they grew up with or they experienced in their lifetime. And I think that's very important for art not to be elitist, for art not to be just for the wealthy, and that all the artwork that it be of exceptional quality, but it has to be recognizable to the average person.
So when you go about acquiring new pieces for your collection, what's that process like?
I always say I kind of just run into it, or it runs into me. I don't seek it out necessarily unless I'm traveling. If I'm traveling somewhere, then I will seek it out. But otherwise, it's what comes to me organically. Once in a while, someone will introduce me to someone or say you need to meet this person, but usually it just comes to me in in my life's experiences. A lot of times it'll be an artist visiting Denver for a show at a different institution. If I like what I see, then I'll introduce myself to that artist and tell them what I'm doing and invite them to one of my locations to learn more about what I'm doing. And I want them to feel that they're part of something bigger. I want them to know that if their work is brought into the collection, it's not for me to impress my friends. It's not for me to impress my community. It's for me to have them feel that they're part of something bigger and to help grow something that can tell our people's story in an even more amazing way. But sometimes I find folk art in secondhand stores or antique stores, or sometimes I've been finding some dealers that carry older pieces of art, and it just so happens to whatever that is that they're selling ties into this bigger story that I'm trying to tell. It's pretty rare that I'll collect something that's an abstract painting or an abstraction, or pretty much whatever's in the collection is very relatable and very affordable.
I'm going to ask you kind of a business question. Is there kind of a price point that you try to stay within to acquire pieces? If funds are a consideration, you're not just going out and blowing 20 grand on a piece just because that you're really conscientious and kind of like keeping your eye out for people that are either facilitating what you want to communicate with your collection, or you're trying to acquire art from an artist that is up and coming and you think will go on and do important things.
Yeah, I leave spending the big bucks up to the people that have the big bucks. I mean, and I was a little bit dismayed that, for lack of a better word, an Anglo man that had a big budget and didn't necessarily have the same passion or knowledge that someone like me would have. But he acquired a lot of the Mexican masters, and now he's going to donate them to the Denver Art Museum. I had tried to court him, but he never really was available or accessible to me. And I was hoping that his pieces could be housed alongside my pieces so that the lesser known artists could be shown with the more well-known artists. But to no surprise, that more prestigious collection is going to be housed now at the Denver Art Museum, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because I've been trying to push the Denver Art Museum for at least a decade now to include more Latin American masters. But I do feel like, wow, that would have been so cool to have that collection in the same building as my collection, because they would have supplemented each other so amazingly well. Now people have to go to two different facilities eventually to have that experience. But I mean, some things I have to spend a decent amount of money on just because I want to include some of those pieces, some of the Mexican master photographers in the collection. It's very important to me to show some of the very most historic or most beautifully taken and printed examples of photography that I have the ability to acquire. But I'm very fortunate that the dealer that I deal with primarily, I usually buy directly from the artist, but on occasion I work with dealers. And the dealer that I work with out of New York City works very close with me and gives me very reasonable prices, and has promised that one day he's going to donate a lot of his collection to me to house under the Mexican Heritage Museum. I'm lucky that a lot of people support the mission and the vision of the Mexican Heritage Museum and the Latino Cultural Arts Center. And I think that that's just going to grow and grow, and that eventually even more foundations and large corporations will have confidence in our work and support what we're doing in community, and realize that what we're doing is very bold and very unique, and that we strive for excellence, and that they'll continue to support our efforts, and that we will realize many components of this dream. And again, it's not just for me, not just for my network, it's for the entire community.
You strike me as somebody, because of what I've seen in some of the photographs I've seen in your collection, you definitely have a love of photography.
Yes.
What does that stem from? Are you a photographer? Did you grow up doing photography like some kids do? Where does that love come from?
Well, I appreciate that you noticed that. I took photography in high school. I fell in love with it. That's at the time when we could still use the dark room, still do our own print, develop our negatives and print our own images. And at that time, I did take a little bit of photography in college, and I was pretty convinced that I would become a photographer for a while. But at the same time, I realized that I was a little bit too obsessed with seeing the world through a lens and putting everything into a context. And it actually, I would say it frightened me that I could very easily have lived without setting the camera down very often, only maybe to eat and take a shower, but otherwise have my camera strapped on a good, 16 hours a day. So, and even in San Francisco, I went on to meet some famous photographers, or would sell some of their postcards and note cards. I had a ethnic arts postcard and note card business where I would sell those to bookstores and photography museum gift shops and gift stores. I would sell images, ethnic subject and photography images. And it just came to at one point I had to decide, am I going to be the artist or am I going to support the artists? And I think after having worked in the gallery and the museum, I decided that the route I would take would be to support the artists, because I realized, well, that's what my father had done. And with my business background, that's probably where I could be the most effective. I was like my father. I loved hanging out with the artists and meeting the artists and going to their studios and eventually being able to buy some of their work.
Was that a hard decision for you to make that call?
I would say it was, because someday I don't think I'll ever have the time, but I would have loved to have been even an editor, a film editor. I would have, and I do that in my own way, like when I work with our marketer and with our social media. But I do miss that, and I do love it still, but I just think realistically, you can't do it all. And it's, at least I get to hang out with these people that get to do this.
It is a wonderful experience to be able to sit in an artist studio and talk art and talk about process. And it's actually one of the reasons we're doing this podcast, is because we just enjoy talking with people and learning about their story. Your question?
I'm enjoying the dialogue.
Oh, okay.
This is good. This is good.
Let's talk about the exhibit at History Colorado. For our listeners that may not know about it, maybe they're coming, traveling from some part of the United States to Denver here in the near future, and they want to check it out. What is this exhibit about, and what will they see when they come visit?
So, as you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, we have approximately 60 works by maybe 40 different artists. Some of the artists were born in Colorado. Some were born in other states like New Mexico, Texas, Wyoming. And a lot of the artists also came from Mexico. My introduction to History Colorado was working on the El Movimiento committee. It was going to be a temporary exhibit that was only going to be up for 3 months in conjunction with a show called 1968. So we were highlighting the El Movimiento experience in Colorado in that particular year. And then the community was so involved, so committed to the project that History Colorado then decided to offer us an opportunity to create a permanent exhibition, so to speak, as part of the Colorado Histories exhibition on the second floor. We were very thrilled that we were finally making progress with History Colorado in having them be inclusionary of our history and culture, which we felt historically was underrepresented. And as part of what became Year of La Chicana this year of 2020, I was offered the opportunity to create an exhibit. And that's because the director of the museum was aware that I had this collection of art. And I was very pleased how they were willing to just turn over the Ballantine Gallery, a newly opened gallery, to me, and had confidence in me that they pretty much gave me carte blanche to create any type of exhibition I wanted. And it occurred to me that I wanted to highlight artists from Colorado, or artists that create in Colorado. And so I came up with the term Hecho en Colorado. I thought it was really important to make the title in Spanish to show the background of the artists, that these were going to be so-called Hispano artists, Spanish surnamed artists. And I realized as I was creating the exhibit that really this was a way to honor the El Movimiento, because a lot of these artists came out of the Chicano civil rights movement, and this was the artistic expression of that movement. So a lot of the artists in the exhibit are now in their 70s. There's one artist who's now 81 years old, Ramon Cali. But I wanted to also honor the commitment that those artists have had to their artwork and to our community. And the fact that someone can dedicate their whole life to creating art is really amazing to me, because that is a difficult career to have, a difficult way to make a living. You make a lot of sacrifices as a visual artist, or as a lot of, I'm sure, also performance artists and musicians and any type of artist has to make a lot of sacrifices to be able to continue to create. And so, in addition, I wanted to bring up some of the new artists in our community, artists that I had only recently heard of or met. And I thought, what a wonderful opportunity to show them all together and to honor some of the more well-known in our community, and to give them an opportunity to be exhibited, especially the younger artists, to be exhibited in a museum, a major Colorado institution. So that's how I came about. I think it was a little unnerving for History Colorado, because I told them they wanted me to plan the whole show out the way that they normally plan out shows, have everything mapped out and measured. And I said, no, that's really not how I do things. I'm very much impromptu. What I'll do is I'll gather up a bunch of pieces in the collection that I think will work well together. I'll bring them to your location and trust that within a couple hours, I'll have the show laid out. And sure enough, that's how we did it. Most of the pieces that I brought were incorporated into the exhibit. A few pieces didn't quite fit in. And I was able to weave together a story. A lot of the pieces in the beginning of the exhibit are a nod to our indigenous heritage, a lot of Aztec and Maya and Southwest Native references. And then I was able to weave in the introduction of the Catholicism and Spanish heritage into this Southwest United States. And then from the rural reality into the urban reality as our people migrated further north from southern Colorado into Pueblo and Denver, and eventually up into northern Colorado to work in the sugar beet fields, and then into some of the contemporary art and the influences of graffiti and spoken word poetry versus the traditional poetry and traditional novel writing. And so I was able to weave together a tale of our people over the last several hundred years, but also a tale of the Chicanos and Mexicanos in Denver and how we're very much interconnected to each other. And again, how art is really not created independent of history, that history very much influences the art that is being created, whether it's contemporary history or ancient history. It's very much relevant to the creation of artwork.
When you were creating or kind of curating that piece, did you start with an idea like that, or while you were selecting the pieces, did it kind of form in that way?
It became apparent to me as I was laying the show out. I'm very much, I work by instinct. Same with the exhibits. I did 3 exhibits at the Arvada Center, 3 consecutive exhibits. This was now, I don't know, it's been a while. I think the last show was maybe 10 years ago. But I'm very instinctive, and I'm so familiar with the artwork. I have confidence in my knowledge of the artwork and familiarity with the subject that I knew that I could wing it, so to speak. And I'm very pleased with how I was able to put it into some type of order that made a lot of sense, especially in the context of a tour. And so I have made myself available for numerous tours. I give a tour every Friday morning at 9:00 to whoever wants to come for that. And then I also make myself available if someone wants to schedule a group tour for their friends or family, groups of 5 to 10 people. And it's so important for me to be able to share the art, but also the history with our community.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed that. I mean, it's one thing to go see an art exhibit, but when you actually talk to the curator and they tell the story, and as you weaved us through the gallery of all the different pieces, you really laid out a beautiful story, and it really interconnected, and it made the world a difference. So if you're going to be in Denver and you're going to see this art exhibit, you're going to want to make an appointment because it's well worth it. It was phenomenal. It was a great learning experience.
Thank you. So the show is up through January the 10th. I'm thrilled to have a 6-month run, especially because of COVID, and otherwise, if we had a shorter run, we wouldn't be able to reach enough people. And I love that we're getting a lot of media attention, because in this world that we live in, if you don't get media attention, it's almost as if something doesn't exist or it didn't happen. So the reason why I like the media attention, it brings attention to the Latino Cultural Arts Center and the work we're doing, and it brings attention to these artists and their years of dedication, and to the emerging artists. It gives them inspiration to want to keep creating for community.
Yeah, and I like the fact that it's a wide breadth of artwork, as far as style, even, from what I would call street photography or graffiti artists to more classical, like trained or kind of what I would expect of classically trained artist. Plus, you'll get to see some of the artwork of people we've interviewed, like Stefan Lazaro and Leo Taguma. Now you get to go see some of their work as you've listened to our podcasts, and you're going to see some amazing, beautiful work of people that we haven't interviewed yet. And now we have a list of people we want to interview as well. So it's just been a wonderful experience to walk through that gallery with you.
Thank you. And I also want to mention to the people listening in that if they go to our website, lcac-denver.org, that a lot of the examples of the artwork are on our website. And we also have been doing a series called Voces en Arte, where I moderate and we bring in 2 artists at a time who are part of the Hecho exhibit and interview them. And hopefully there'll come a time where I can do a video tour of the exhibit so that we can record that history so that people who can't attend the exhibit in person can tune in and see the tour and hear the tour.
Fantastic. So what else is on the horizon? And we've been asking this as we come into the last part of 2020, which I think everybody is relieved that it's coming to a close, and we're hopeful for 2021.
Yes.
Is there anything on the horizon that you would like to talk about as far as events or other exhibits you might be a part of?
Nothing specific. I think I'm going to focus very hard this year or this coming year on making sure that Las Bodegas can be open to the public in 2022. Right now we're in design and permitting stage. So if we can get past that, we've unfortunately hit some snags with regards to parking. But once we make our way around that obstacle, we'll get the bodegas renovated and start working and focusing on the programming that we're going to offer there so that we can open it to the general public in 2022, hopefully the earlier part of 2022. We are continuing to work with a lot of the local artists. We did an artist training program. We're doing some of these interviews and videotaping of some of our local talent. We involved 4 of our local artists to create work for the ofrenda kits that we have created this year so that the community can support the LCAC and in turn receive altar kits, so to speak, that carry handmade, somewhat more authentic art that can be placed on an altar to honor those that have passed. I think it's really important that we keep the traditional folk art or artisan traditions alive because they're quickly being lost to commercialism, to mass-produced items, to inauthentic or what you would call appropriated imagery. And so if we can give our artists an opportunity to make a little bit of an income and continue to do what they do, it's something that I think it's very much worth aspiring for us to grow, and even on a national level. And again, to also support artisans throughout the Americas. What doesn't cost a lot for us economically to invest in can make the world of difference in their lives, can provide an opportunity to education or healthcare to these communities. And if we look back on what it is that they do, for example, we have some mantillos or little mantas or little textiles that people can put on their altar that we commissioned some artisans from Chiapas, Mexico to create. It takes them 3 days to weave one of these pieces, and they're exquisite. In addition to that, these are traditions, weaving traditions in their Tzotzil Maya communities that go back hundreds of years. And if they don't receive the support that they need, it would be very, very difficult for them to keep these traditions alive. And we have the possibility and the means. And in return, we receive this incredible piece of artwork, of heritage, this incredible piece of heritage, just beautiful weavings. And we also commissioned a group out of San Juan Chamula, Chiapas, to create some decorative components. And we have some artwork created by artisans from Peru that are just beautiful additions to anybody's altar. And I think it's very important that we steer people away from the temptation to buy inexpensive, mass-produced, so-called artwork that's now being sold at Walmart and Michael's.
I have another art question I want to ask you. So obviously, as an art collector, you love everything that you collect. You know, you're a lover of the arts, you're an advocate.
Yes.
But who are some of your favorite artists that you've enjoyed collecting over the years, or that you really like special pieces in your collection that you think that just speak to you, that you're like, that's like.
That's the
like choosing your own child. Which child is your favorite?
Yes, exactly. I am very attached. I try not to be so attached to material objects, but I'm very attached because most of this work I've had the experience of acquiring directly from the artist, and I associate it with that time of my life, or whoever I went to the studio with, or the interactions I had with the artist or their family, or and I have a lot of pieces that are very nostalgic because they remind me of my father or my grandmother or my childhood. A lot of nostalgia. But again, I don't think it's just my nostalgia. I think I collect things that also bring up nostalgia in other people, because, for example, ashtrays of Cantinflas, vintage ashtrays. And although I didn't grow up watching Cantinflas movies, I'm very familiar with his character. And a lot of people did grow up watching that. And I know my father knew probably most of the Cantinflas, or imagery of El Santo, the wrestler, the luchador from my father's hometown of Tulancingo, Hidalgo. And although I didn't grow up with El Santo, I still have a lot of nostalgia for what he represented as being the person to protect his community, the protector of the downtrodden, and nostalgia for another time that was my father's era. The images from the golden age of Mexican cinema, the placards from movies, and knowing that Manuel Alvarez Bravo took a lot of those photographs, and what is on those boards were original Manuel Alvarez photographs that are now, very pricey and hard to acquire. But when it's on a movie poster, it's for some reason not considered as valuable as one of his, more well-known images. I love my photography collection. I just love it because I love photography. The folk art is just, to some pieces that are super humble, to other pieces that are very much sophisticated, elevated, not what you would expect from folk art. They're just such fine art, so beautiful. I really and truly could never, I could never pick. This is all, it's just all very, very dear to me. And I think that I hope that it becomes very dear to our community, and that the community takes ownership of it and feels pride in it, and that our young people become very proud of who they are, and continue to explore and enrich their lives, and then bring those traditions to their children.
I think the wonderful thing about what you're doing is, collectors, a lot of collectors will collect one thing, photography or fine art or certain painters. But your collection is so eclectic. I mean, you got photography, you got fine art, you have magazines, you have books, and you're really collecting a complete cultural piece that you'll leave as a legacy to the next generation. And that, I think, is beyond what I would normally think of a collector doing. I mean, you're collecting an entire culture.
Yes.
And that's beautiful.
I do as much as I can. I have things from the kitchen, items from the kitchen. I have textiles, jewelry, musical instruments, the works, because culture is so vast, and Mexican culture is extremely vast and extremely rich. And the one thing that I do limit myself to at this point is that it be of Mexican heritage. But now that it's becoming a more complete collection, I am able to branch out. And I realize if I'm going to have a Museo Colibri, that I need to also have examples of other Latin American expression. So I am slowly but surely, still most of my resources will go to Chicano, Mexicano artwork, but I will be branching out little by little into whatever crosses my path that is a beautiful representation of other Latin American cultures.
Well, I will second what Wes said just a moment ago. And I love that you're, a lot of people that collect, you don't get to see their collection until after they passed and it's been donated somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. I love the fact that you want to get this out in the community and share it with everyone so that everyone can appreciate it, not just yourself or your family. Or as a lover of photography, this just kind of popped in my head, but we used to have a phenomenal photography museum here, so to speak, called Camera Obscura.
Remember.
Did you frequent Camera Obscura?
I frequented it, but unfortunately at the time I couldn't even afford one piece from him. I don't believe I ever, Mr. Gould.
Yeah.
I don't believe I even had the means to purchase. No, I don't think I bought anything from him because I just didn't have the money. And I would have loved to have bought some of the pieces that I had seen at his gallery. He was a real treasure. And no, I didn't. But thanks for asking.
Yeah, I was curious, as a lover of photography, and I miss that place all the time.
Oh,
I
yes.
used to love just to walk around in there. And Camera Obscura Gallery, kind of down near the Denver Art Museum. For people that don't know, it was he probably had the most diverse collection of photography between the East and West Coast. He just had this phenomenal gallery, and if you loved photography, you just get lost in there for hours. And the best selection of photography books in his little library that he had. Sure. You could find things that you couldn't find anywhere else.
Yes, I remember well, and it was a very beautiful experience, and that just enhanced my appreciation of photography hanging out there.
So if money was no object, right?
If only.
Is there anything that sticks in your mind of anything that you either have been exposed to, and if you had the means you could have bought, or things that you've seen maybe online or whatever, or a particular artist that if money was no object that you would buy?
I think I would go online and find out who some of the current Mexican-American creators are and try to go to their studios and meet them and pick up some of their work. Only in that I want to support my own people, so to speak, and encourage them. And I would love to travel more and do that and collect more. But again, I'm so focused on just getting this project launched and in good hands. But you mentioned something interesting, that a lot of people don't get to see a lot of collections until the collector passes. For me, it's important to not wait to that point and to be proactive. But also, I don't want to have this collection end up in the hands of a major institution that will leave most of it in the deep freeze, most of it in the basement. And once in a while, a piece or two will see the light of day. That's not what I think needs to happen with this collection. I firmly believe that most of it needs to be out on exhibition most of the time. I would like to dedicate maybe 3/4 of the museum to the permanent collection and 1/4 to rotating art. But I think that I would like it to be up and on view so that if someone does visit from Japan, that they'll see the collection, the bulk of the collection at any given time, that they don't have to come back on several occasions, or maybe they only get one chance to see the collection and only see a small portion of it. I want to have as much out as possible. And for young people that are growing up for their first exposure to the art, that they see as much of it as possible and let blow their minds from the beginning. Get them hooked from the beginning. Don't just feed it to them in little bits and pieces, like I was fed in little bits and pieces and scrounging everywhere I could to find it. I want it to be accessible. And not only to people here in Denver, but internationally for anyone visiting, that they can come and it'll be accessible to them.
And I think it's so important also that, you're providing an opportunity for a young child of Mexican descendants to come and see something that they can relate to. And I think that helps drive them to say, I want to do that as well. Mm-hmm. When they recognize in themselves what they're seeing in the piece. Mm-hmm. So that's beautiful.
It shouldn't have been such a difficult road to finally get to the place where I get to be so proud and enjoy my culture so much. I should have just been there. I shouldn't have had to struggle so hard to find it. And I don't want other people to have to struggle with their identity the way that I had to. And it's just, my life is so incredibly enriched by the art that's come into my life. And I just want to share that with as many people as I possibly can.
Well, I can say our life has been enriched by just sitting down with you for a day. And I've learned a lot today.
Thank you.
So thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's been an honor and a privilege to sit down with you and have the shared experience. The personal tour at History Colorado was phenomenal, and just hear some of your family history and your history and what you're trying to facilitate here in Denver. I really appreciate all the things that you're doing. If people want to support you, the LCAC and any of the other endeavors that you have going on, how do they go about donating money or doing volunteer work for you? How would they go about finding that information and help supporting what you're trying to facilitate here?
So I would encourage people to go to our website, lcac-denver.org. We have a section where you can make a contribution, and then it's through Colorado Gives, the Colorado Gives website. But also, if you want to volunteer, please just reach out to us. I think we have, I don't remember the exact email address. It's info@lcac-denver.org, I believe. And you can also just give us a phone call. There's a phone number on the website. Just call us, have a chat. Consider us a resource. I am more than willing to share any knowledge that I have, any people I can put the public into contact with. I would be very happy to facilitate that. If there's a specific artist you want to meet or communicate with, I'll point you in their direction. I consider myself, like I said earlier, a conduit or a resource. So whatever I can do, reach out to me.
Fantastic. And social media, people can find you on social media as well?
Yes, it's under LCAC Denver on Facebook and Instagram. We have pretty amazing posts. Sometimes it's somewhat Chicano Mexicano centric, but that's the region we're in and that's the audience we have at this time. We try to go beyond that, but we're educating ourselves about the larger Latino community, and we encourage them to reach out to us and educate us and share with us.
Well, this has definitely been an education for both Wes and I today. So, Adrianna, thank you so much for being on today and giving us a good portion of your Saturday. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
For the Tenant Podcast, this is Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great week.
Yay! Shoo!